Zombie Revenge shambled onto the Sega Dreamcast for some zombie revenge back in the year 2000. Originally released in the arcades for Sega by Sega back in 1999 as a spin-off to its successful House of the Dead series, Zombie Revenge tosses out all that on-rail shooter stuff and instead goes for a more third-person console-style action game that sadly just wasn't lighting up arcades at the time. At least here in the US anyway, as it was apparently pretty popular in Japan. That success in Japan pushed Sega to bring it home to the Sega Dreamcast in January of 2000 to see if maybe people would want some of that sweet zombie revenge in the comfort of their living rooms. The home version of Zombie Revenge was essentially a perfect port of the arcade game, along with a whole bunch of fun additions that were exclusive to the Dreamcast. Unfortunately though, the combination of a limited US Dreamcast audience and middling reviews didn't exactly have everyone rushing out to play Zombie Revenge on console either. But that certainly didn't stop me from grabbing a copy at my local electronics boutique, and I do remember having a lot of fun with this one. So let's go ahead and check out Zombie Revenge and see if it's aged a bit better than the rotting zombies that it's filled with. Now, before we actually get into the game, we need to take a minute to talk about the story of Zombie Revenge, or more specifically, the voice actors that tell the story. The actual plot is your typical mad scientist trying to bring back the dead through genetic experiments for his own gain kind of thing that's just mostly there to make sure there's a reason for you to be killing a bunch of zombies. It's really nothing special and usually goes by so quick that you'd be hard-pressed to pay attention if the voice acting wasn't the best voice acting of all time.
Are we still following this guy?
He's the one making the zombie. To catch him, we have to follow. Let's go.
Here, take this! A man with golden eyes said to give it to you. How did I get myself into this mess?
So, you made it here alive. Well done for a human.
What are you doing?
Why am I doing this?
There are so many times I'd be thrown into a fit of laughter thanks to these lines of dialogue that are all seemingly being delivered by people that had only just learned what human emotion and linguistics are an hour before recording these masterpieces. If you've ever played any of the other House of the Dead games, then you probably already know what to expect here, as those games, especially House of the Dead 2, are legendary for how bad the voice acting is. And depending on how much of that you find amusing, then you'll either be overjoyed or reaching to turn the volume down as soon as possible here. For me though, personally, this is genuinely one of the game's highlights. Hell, I still quote some of these lines 20 plus years later. Anyway, enough with the story, and let's get to doing what Zombie Revenge is all about, which is revenge on zombies, I guess. Start the game up and you get to choose from 3 whole characters that all have their own unique moves and combos, though it really only comes down to who moves the fastest or does the most damage. Also know you're not seeing things. That one dude is totally named Stick, and yes, it makes me laugh every time I see it. Starting out in the cold, dark alleyways of Zombie Town, you get what first it seems to be a 3D brawler, but you quickly figure out that, yes, much like the House of the Dead games, Zombie Revenge wants you to use your guns more than your fists. While you can indeed fight your way through using punches and kicks, it's generally not the optimal way of getting through the armies of the undead. Instead, each character is equipped with a pistol that locks onto whatever enemy is nearby. Whenever locked on, you'll see a green circle appear around the zombie, and that means you're good to go with laying the hammer down. Though if you've got a little bit of patience, you can leave the target locked on for a second or more, at which point the target will turn red, giving you a much more powerful shot that can also stun or knock down most enemies. Using the powered up shot is what you want to use if you have the time and space, since your basic shot doesn't really do too much damage, and these zombies definitely take more than a few hits to take down. It also helps to conserve bullets since you're working with limited ammo here as well, and nothing sucks more than having to rely on the game's janky hand-to-hand combat to get yourself out of a bad situation. The hand-to-hand stuff never really feels good at all, and it can be kinda hard to actually connect with your target since the hit detection can be all over the place. Worse yet, if you perform one of each character's combo moves and miss, then you're basically locked into the move until it's done, as you just punch through the air and pray that nothing attacks you until you're finished. Some of the moves that you can use to jump back up from being knocked down can be useful, but overall you'll want to stick with finding and conserving ammo as much as possible to take down the masses of the undead coming at you. You also get a pretty large selection of weapons that you can pick up and use as well, either finding them around the level or by exploring optional side rooms. These weapons definitely pack a punch, and they're totally worth picking up whenever you see them, since they use their own set of ammo and drop off whenever you've used them up. And honestly, you can really get tired of burning up an entire room of zombies with your flamethrower or mowing down whatever's in front of you with a machine gun. Strangely though, none of these weapons use the same lock-on targeting as your pistol, so it can sometimes be a bit awkward making sure that you hit your intended target. Another item you'll want to be on the lookout for are herbs, which help cure the zombie infection that creeps up over your life bar whenever you get hit. And like the voice acting, depending on who you are, this is either pretty cool or completely ruins the game. Essentially, being infected will slowly cripple your character the more it builds up, causing you to move slower and deal less damage the more your life bar eats up. And you can actually turn into a zombie if it makes it to 100% and you're playing co-op, which I actually think is really cool. Though I can see how a lot of people think this needlessly ruins the pacing of the game. Like it or not though, you'll still need to be on the lookout for whatever herbs you see lying around so as to not succumb to your zombie STD. And just staying alive will be a challenge as you fight your way through the game's 6 levels that are all filled with multiple sections each. They're all mostly pretty generic horror-style settings with dark back alleys and abandoned, rundown buildings littering most of the scenery, and honestly it all just kind of blends in together thanks to quite possibly the muddiest color palette ever used in a video game. House of the Dead fans at least get a nice surprise visit to the original mansion towards the end of the game, which is a nice addition, but otherwise the stages do a good job of staying in the background, which is where they should be. It's just unfortunate that the camera can't do the same, as it seems super jazzed to constantly move around the action to try and frame each encounter differently. Problem is that the angles can make the already frustrating hit detection even more of a nuisance when you're also fighting with whatever weird angle the camera's trying to fly to at any given time. If you can make it through each level, then you get to square off against one of the game's insane boss monsters, and this is definitely another highlight of the game for me. Each boss looks the part of being a giant mutated undead creature, with the later bosses being some of the more disgusting boss fights that I can think of outside of maybe the Splatterhouse series of games, like this giant slime skeleton that just barfs his death on you constantly. There's really not much strategy in beating them besides just trying to avoid them, but the spectacle of these mutated bastards is always fun to fight through. While it may sound like the most generic game ever, Zombie Revenge is actually a really fun and unique take on what a 3D brawler could be. By using gunplay to cover up for the uneven hand-to-hand combat, Zombie Revenge actually ends up being a much faster and more frenetic game than anything the genre had seen at that point. It was light years ahead of what Fighting Force attempted to do on the PlayStation, and showed that the formula for a fast and fun brawler set in the third dimension was totally possible. While the game definitely has issues with its controls and constant need to throw the camera all over the damn scene, it's still more than worth your time checking out these days, especially if you got a friend for co-op. Its original release on the Dreamcast was unfortunately its only release though. Apparently a PS2 version was planned at some point, but ultimately fell through, which genuinely sucks because this game definitely needed to get itself in front of more players than the limited Dreamcast audience. I really think it could have been a pretty big hit if it had actually been advertised somewhat and not been released on a console that already had one foot in the grave. Still though, the game we did get on our dearest Dreamcast was a lot of fun and even got a lot of console exclusive stuff, like a single player story mode that allows you to collect items and food that you acquired through a separate minigame that you played on the VMU. Remember the VMU? That thing was a lifesaver in church for me. But yeah, you could totally do that. It even had its own VMU fishing game as well, if you can believe that. Overall, this is a really solid package and well worth picking up if you come across it, and it's definitely a must-have for anyone's Dreamcast library. It's a rotting, shambling mess of a game, and I mean that in the best way possible. Besides, what other game out there can match this level of voice acting?
What's with the smoke?
Stick brightly. You especially must suffer.
What?